This is the Kirk Bloodsworth case by Gabriel Casella, period 1. On July 24th, 1984, a 9-year-old girl by the name of Dawn Hamilton is found in the woods near her home of Rosedale, Maryland, by a Baltimore police detective. She had been raped and beat to death with a rock. The last two people to see Dawn alive were her neighbors, who were two boys fishing in a pond behind the apartment complex where she lived. The boys witnessed her walk off with a man who they described as skinny, 6'5", with brown hair and a bushy mustache. A police sketch was sent out to the television and newspapers, and 2 weeks later, an anonymous caller identified the perpetrator as Kirk Bloodsworth. Kirk at the time lived in Cambridge, which is 85 miles away from Rosedale where Dawn was murdered. He was 6 feet tall, had red hair, mutton chops, glasses, and was well over 200 pounds, which is different than the description given by the boys who had seen the suspect in the image.
I first heard about Dawn's murder on the news, and it was god-awful murder. I mean, the average person can't fathom what happened to that child. I had been questioned on August 8th, 1984 about it, and I told him I had nothing to do with it. 2:45 the next morning, I mean, a boom, boom, boom on my cousin's door, and somebody said, "Step outside, Mr. Bloodsworth. You're under arrest for first-degree murder of Dawn Venice Hamilton."
The following year, in 1985, prosecutors with no physical evidence linking Kirk Bloodsworth to the crime accused him of the rape and murder of Dawn Hamilton. Prosecutors had little evidence against Kirk, but what they did have was that he was somewhat similar to the description given by the boys who had last seen Dawn. An anonymous caller identified him as the person in the police sketch. He lived in the general area of Dawn. He could not support an alibi, and the night that Dawn was murdered, when he got home, he told his wife that he had done something that would affect his marriage. During the trial, 5 witnesses testified that they had seen Bloodsworth with the victim, although 2 witnesses had not been able to identify him during a lineup. Kirk protested his innocence, but on March 8th, 1985, nearly 1 year after the death of Dawn Hamilton, he was convicted of the first-degree murder, sexual assault, and rape of Dawn Hamilton, and he was sentenced to death via gas chamber, where he would remain on death row for 2 years.
They convicted me on all counts. Guilty first-degree murder, guilty of sexual assault, guilty of rape, guilty of all this, and I'm just standing there and my face is about as red as you can get a face. I'm so pissed and mad, and my father's, trying to object to the judge like that's gonna help, and my mother's just crying,
Over 2 years after Kirk's incarceration, in 1987, the police revealed that they had failed to inform the defense that there may have been another suspect, which exonerated Kirk from death row. His conviction was overturned by the appellate court and this time sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. In addition, a post-conviction investigation revealed that when Kirk mentioned he'd done something to harm his marriage on the night of Dawn's murder, he only meant that he had failed to buy the food that his wife had requested.
You're in a soundproof room and everybody else is out on the outside, right? And you're in the inside and you're screaming and you're beating on the window and you're trying to tell them, and they're just walking by you like you're not even there.
Years later, in the early 1990s, when Bloodsworth had already been imprisoned for over 5 years, he learned of DNA testing and grew an interest in it from the opportunity it could provide to prove his innocence. Kirk begged for a review of the DNA on the physical evidence for years until in 1992 the prosecution agreed to DNA testing. Police had found a semen spot on Don Hilton's underwear, and science had progressed enough to test the physical evidence. The victim's shorts, underwear, a stick found at the scene, and an autopsy slide were compared against DNA from the victim and Bloodsworth. Forensic Science Associates, a private California laboratory, found that it did not match Bloodsworth's DNA. Replicate testing by the FBI yielded the same results. Kirk Bloodsworth was released from prison in June of 1993 and pardoned in December of 1993. He had spent nearly 9 years in prison, with 2 of those years on death row. He is the first American sentenced to death to be exonerated post-conviction by DNA testing. Unfortunately, it wasn't until August of 2003 that the real killer, Kimberly Shea Ruffner, with a history of sexual assault, confessed to acting alone and killing Don Hamilton nearly 20 years earlier. Ruffner was already serving time in a prison for an unrelated assault when the same DNA evidence that exonerated Bloodsworth led authorities to Ruffner. Coincidentally, Ruffner and Bloodsworth were cellmates in Maryland State Penitentiary in the late 1980s and knew of each other. With the confession, Ruffner was sentenced to life imprisonment. In the decade following Kirk's release from prison, he had a rough life being associated with the Don Hamilton case and the United States being unsure of his innocence. Kirk today lives in Philadelphia and is the executive director of Witness to Innocence, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to abolishing the death penalty. It was founded in 2005 and he is still an active member. He is also a supporter of the Innocent Protection Act, which aims to reduce the risk of executing innocent people. It also ensures that convicted offenders have a chance to prove innocent through DNA testing. Maryland became the 18th U.S. state to abolish the death penalty in 2013, with no small effort from Kirk Bloodsworth. At just the age of 23, ex-Marine Kirk Bloodsworth had to endure so much and now helps those who are living his worst days. He was mistakenly arrested, convicted, hated by the entire state of Maine and the United States as a whole, on death row for 2 years waiting for the day he would be murdered, tormented in prison by his cellmates, lost 9 years of his life to prison, and was unknowingly next to the real killer the whole time. And now he has dedicated his life to helping those in his situation. A recent study by the Center of Wrongful Convictions and the Innocent Project have estimated that 1% of the United States prison population, approximately 20,000 people, are falsely convicted.
I wasn't exonerated because the system worked. It was a series of miracles that made it work. My faith in my own belief that I knew I was an innocent person, and at the end of the day, the truth came out. My personal reasons for being opposed to the death penalty are quite simple. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody in America and the world. What I'm saying is that an innocent person can be executed. That should never happen. If we kill one innocent person, it's one too many.